Now, the Tower of Babel story, another great testament to unity and diversity. And as I said to the children, it may not be the scientific truth, but it's still powerful because of all the other truths that we can plumb out of the depths of that story. Like all the sacred stories, it tells us that underneath all of our differences, we are truly united as one family, one people, that there's only one race, the human race. It makes the case that all of humanity's blessed diversity is part of the divine plan. It says that God spread people all over the earth, gave many languages, and it's all part of why we're here. But it also tells us that our job is here on earth, right? It's not to build a tower up to heaven somewhere, to focus our lives, our religions, our churches on getting somehow to a heaven in another world and in another life. It's about being here in this world, in this life, as fully as we possibly can. As the central prayer of Christianity says, "Thy will be done, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. See, our job is not to try to become like gods. Our job is to try to learn, what does it mean to be human? Socrates, he told us that an unexamined life is not worth living. 2 weeks ago, if you were here, you may recall I ended my sermon with the idea that we are building here in the center of Tulsa, in the center of America, our own cathedral to God and the human spirit. And so someone might ask, well, what's the difference between such a cathedral to God and the human spirit and a Tower of Babel? And I'd say a lot. I want to talk about that this morning. A church that's focused on heaven in the next life usually tells us that this world is not what's important, or even that this world is bad and sinful. That if you see trouble or if you have trouble, don't worry, because all will be well in the next life. Now, wrapped up in this theology is that our bodies are somehow tainted and corrupt, and even our spirits are depraved with sin from the moment of our birth. Imagine that. Such a theology takes one of the most beautiful miracles, the birth of a child, and it turns it into something ugly and corrupt and guilt-ridden and shameful. Think about that. And these religions that are mostly focused on the next life and the next world, they're not only focused on the hope of heaven, but oftentimes they're also focused on the fear of hell. It's very common for such theologies to conjure up these medieval images of a fiery dungeon in order to scare people into behaving a certain way. And we know that the haunted houses at churches across Oklahoma are opening their doors this week, inviting children and teens to come through so they can literally, quote, scare the hell out of these children. I think we need to love the hell out of these children, not scare the hell out of them. Jesus said, love your neighbor. Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor. He even said, love your enemy. He didn't say scare the hell out of anybody. Now, in contrast to that kind of theology, a religion that's focused on this life and this world does not fill people's head with foreboding concoctions of a hell, God's torture chamber, but instead concerns itself with the very real hells that exist right here in this world. Hells that are not some spurious speculation, but hells that we can see with our own eyes, like hunger and poverty and abuse and addiction and discrimination. These are real hells. And this is what a church needs to put its attention and its resources into focusing on, rather than spending time trying to terrorize people into some nightmarish notion of a next life. Now, otherwise, a church is just a Tower of Babel. And any message focused primarily on getting to the next world is just that. It's Babel. And Babel is the Bible's word for baloney. It's a translation from the Hebrew. Now, these books that the children brought to church and they brought up here, this morning, placed on our chancel as a tower, these are not meant to be left here in the church as a sacrifice to some ethereal God that, some stairway to heaven. These books are to be spread out and sent to children all over this city who need them. That's how we've come to interpret, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We need to always keep in mind that this sanctuary is not where our religion happens. This church is merely a springboard. It's a launching pad. We come here to be inspired, to be filled up, to be sent out into the world, to be builders and healers and uniters, to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and house the homeless, to comfort the widows and the orphans. That's what we're supposed to be doing here in this world. Now, when our service ends in here, that's when our service begins out there. That's how we do our part to create the kingdom of heaven right here on earth. Now, I like the term better, the commonwealth of heaven. A little less monarchical. Equally valid translation, the commonwealth of heaven. Now, you may have heard of the story of the man who dies and he goes to heaven, and St. Peter's giving him his introductory tour. First, they pass this room and they hear people who are singing and dancing and breaking plates, and St. Peter says, "That's the Greek Orthodox over there." And he goes by another room, he hears people chanting and they're laughing, and St. Peter says, "Those are the Buddhists." They pass through a doorway, they hear people talking passionately and arguing furiously, and he says, "Those are the Jews." And then St. Peter says, "Shh, we need to be really quiet as we pass by this door here." And the man says, "Why is that?" St. Peter explains, "This room holds the Southern Baptists, and they still think they're the only ones up here." Now, I'm not trying to pick on anybody this morning. You can fill in, the church denomination of your choice. Any church that says that they have the exclusive ticket to heaven. The point being that if we're talking about creating the commonwealth of heaven right here on earth, then we might want to think what heaven looks like. I think most of us agree that heaven would have to be a place where no one is hungry, hurt, hunted, haunted, or harmed. A place where no one's lonely, left, lost, or lamenting. Where no one's robbed, raped, ransacked, ridiculed, run over, run off, or run down. You want me to keep going, Gerald? Place where no one's denigrated, demeaned, disparaged, decried, or discriminated against. Place where we are truly united as a brotherhood and a sisterhood of all humankind. One race, the human race, regardless of sexual orientation, skin pigmentation, creed, culture, or class. So religion must be focused on creating this kind of world right here. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of babble. And the church is just a tower to nowhere. Now, I can imagine that some people who look at All Souls from the outside, they see how we put so much effort into justice building and into loving our neighbors, and they could think to themselves that our focus is only external. But just because we love our neighbors doesn't mean that we don't love one another here in this church. And as a minister, I am blessed, truly blessed to share great moments in people's lives. I've been there with a family and I blessed the house that our house group rehabilitated, that from the brink of ruin. And I watched with appreciation and pride on the family's faces as they realized how they would be able to raise their children in a safe environment. And I knew that for these fine folks, it was not just a blessing, it was a miracle. That a group of volunteers who they did not know, from a church that they had never heard of, came and worked for months for free to make sure that they didn't lose their home, which was the only financial asset that they had. It's a blessing to be a part of this kind of kindness, to be party to these little pieces of bringing heaven right down here to earth.